Okay, so back again. Gonna keep working on this UI that we've sort of been building out this week. So where we kind of left off last was we built out this like cool filters menu and this kind of responsive nav, or sorry, it's collapsible nav for the mobile layout, and kind of put together this basic form UI. So the next thing that we need to look into, I think, that's going to start making things a little bit more exciting is the responsive stuff. So right now we've just been doing everything sort of at this 375 kind of mobile viewport. But we have a bunch of these kind of variations in layout that we need to account for when the UI gets bigger. So me and Steve kind of designed all this stuff using Tailwinds. Tailwinds built-in breakpoints. We sort of just tried to accommodate what was there. So this is at 641. The Tailwind one is 640, 768, 1024, and then we've got this kind of very different layout for 1280 and up on like really large screens. Some of the details in some of these intermediate screens I don't think are like super precise or thought through. Me and Steve kind of were just trying to figure out some basic layout ideas before he had to leave for a trip to Europe for a conference. So you can see like some of the details are not quite perfect when it comes to like the alignment of like stuff like this. They're not perfectly lined up, or, you know, this is not in quarters, but this is in quarters. So some of these things we're going to take some liberties with when we actually implement it, and maybe think through some of it for ourselves and think about if there's ways that we can improve it. But yeah, we're going to use this as sort of the starting point. So yeah, we've been working just at the mobile viewport so far. So I think the next step is just going to be basically to bump the responsive layout in DevTools up to 640, and then just work on kind of rearranging things. So I think what we'll start with is this filters menu, and then we should think about how to handle this stuff down here. So me and Steve had this idea for being able to do like a horizontal scrolling sort of view here, kind of like you might see on a mobile app. There's a lot of apps these days where you just kind of swipe left and right to scroll through a list of cards. So I've actually never built that, and I don't know what weird challenges are going to be involved. So we will just have to see what happens and if that ends up being feasible or not. So we'll get into that, which will be fun. And yeah, we'll see how far we get. The responsive stuff with Tailwind is usually pretty quick. So since we're not doing like a totally brand new design and all these little details, we're really just like rearranging pieces. I don't think it's going to be as complicated as some of the stuff we did in the past. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get pretty far with this responsive stuff. Maybe not all the way there, but pretty far. So one thing that is brutal about this sort of work when you're trying to do a split screen thing on a reduced resolution so that it works well on the screen for the stream is that it's really hard to see kind of multiple things at once, but we'll kind of just make do. So I think what I'll do is I'll bump this down to the bottom so we have a little bit more room to play here. And we'll take this up to 640, which is kind of our next breakpoint, not 6,000. I'll just do a refresh so we kind of have a decent starting point. So you can already see some things are a little bit messed up, like this doesn't look right, and yeah, but we'll worry about that second. Let's focus on kind of the layout for this form first. So to be quite honest, like I don't even think this is really that bad of a kind of situation to be in. But we're going to try and improve it a little bit. So it looks like the changes that we want to make here is kind of make everything go in line so that nothing is stacked. So, and then this button is not going to be full width anymore. So you can see like this button is really wide. We can either put it on the left, we can put it on the right. We can kind of play with it and see which one we like. But yeah, let's just kind of get started. So first things first, let's try and take this grid here and kind of turn it into like a 3-column thing where we've got, I guess it's like half, I don't know what it'll be. We'll just kind of see. We might start with thirds. We might play with it a little bit, see what we need to do to get it to work. So let's just jump over to that section. So this is our search filters view component, which is basically this entire section, including the sort of collapsible area. So here is kind of where we were doing this stuff. We got this field set that kind of houses everything. And then we've got this like flex container for the top half and this container for the bottom half. So since we kind of want everything to go side by side here, there's a couple of different ways I think that we can handle it. If we don't want to really change the structure of things too much, we could just make this a flex container. So we could say, and I got to make sure I don't break out of this habit, but since we're working at a medium screen size now, like 640 is Tailwinds, actually, sorry, it's Tailwinds SM breakpoint. Every single change that we're adding, we only want to add it for SM screens and above. So I want to make sure that anytime I type a class, I'm prefixing it with SM colon. So if we do SM flex, then we should see, let's see, it doesn't change anything, probably because like some width stuff we have to think about, but it should be at least being applied. Yeah, SM flex. And then because of the 1/2 stuff, that's probably kind of our problem here. So, okay, we got SM flex here. Why don't we do like SM with 1/2 on this? Okay, so that kind of brings everything off to the side there. Let's think. So let's figure out what we need to do to get this other section up. So we've got SM with 1/2. This one, if we set this to SM with 1/2 too, maybe that'll jump up. Not quite, and it looks like this has some other sort of issue to think about here. So this has got some negative margin on the sides, and here we don't have that. So this is 304. This is 304. Kind of curious why it's not jumping up, honestly. Just trying to think through in my head. This is a little bit what we did here is a little bit different than like what I had planned, what I was thinking about originally. Like I was thinking we'd kind of just make one container for all these and just let them wrap. And I know for sure that would work, but I thought it would be interesting to sort of play with this approach and kind of see what happens. So if we look at what do we got for the full width here, we got 640, and then we've got 304, 304. Like 304 times 2 is less than 640. So I'm a little bit surprised that we aren't able to see this like wrapping, honestly. If I was to take this element and make it narrower, say we went like width like 100 pixels, it's still not wrapping. So why is that? Can you not make a field set display flex or something? Like, is there something weird about that? Like if this is just a div? Ah, interesting. I think I remember this. Field sets can't have a display of flex. Stupid. Okay, no problem. Well, that makes our lives easier anyways. At least I know like what that problem was. So we're going to face that as we continue on, but no big deal. All right, so let's kind of get this like side by side in kind of like the right spot. So I think what we're going to want to do here is make this act as a row, kind of like we did here where we have like the negative MX2 thing. So we could do this like just at this size, although I don't think it's going to affect anything. And then we could say SMPX2 here. And this should get us a little bit surprised by that outcome. Let's see. What am I not thinking about here? Oh, did I put this on the... Okay, so we've got this element here with 1/2. We would definitely want SM MT0. Now I'm a little bit surprised by... I guess it's like... it must be related to this like negative margin stuff. I'm surprised that these are overlapping because they both have padding though, and they aren't actually being like 50% width, which is surprising too. Like if you have this set to width 1/2, you would think that would be 1/2 of 640, but it doesn't appear to be. So here's the thing about live streams. Anytime you live stream anything, everything will be harder than it would have been if you did it on your own. So give me a second here to just like think through, like out of curiosity, just say we were to just get rid of this and get rid of this, or no, we can leave that one, get rid of this one. What do we got to do to get, okay, so it is related to the negative margins in some way. Okay, so let's just kind of do it in like the most direct way possible. Then maybe we can refactor the implementation to simplify it if necessary. So if we switch to an MX0 here and we get rid of the SM MX2 and we move this SM PX2 to here, and we add an SM negative MX2 here, I think this should get us a little bit closer. Yeah, okay. So we've got that. It's got its negative padding stuff. Kind of looks like the right spacing. So this is now 312. Here we've got 312. So these are the same size. The padding is the same size. So, all right. So that is kind of working in terms of just kind of doing a very simple implementation, right? Like Steve didn't have it like quarter, half. He kind of had totally arbitrary that I think he was just doing really quick. So this is okay. You know, this is an option. We could make it a little bit different if we wanted to as well. But I think this actually looks kind of nice to just have it like a quarter, a half. So let's just roll with that. Okay, so let's do this stuff next. So all we really got to do is take all this stuff and lay them out side by side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this field set to a div, and I'm going to change this field set to a div. Because field sets are apparently an evil HTML element that we should never use. And if we want all this stuff to be side by side, then probably the smart thing to do is wrap these in a div too, so that we have a way to kind of target them as a group. And we can do flex. Okay, and that should get us a little bit closer here. And then we just kind of want to give all these things a width. So we could just do something like this, width 1/4, and you know, that I think is fairly reasonable, although you can see like this is not lined up with this, and that's because there's padding, I think, on these columns, but not on these ones. So maybe we should build that the same way. So let's add a PX2 here. Oh man, I made the mistake of forgetting to prefix everything. We got to be careful that I'm not creating problems for myself here. I didn't make that mistake up here, did I? No, we're good. Okay, so we added the padding, and now we just also need to add the negative margin here to sort of pull everything out, get it right to the sides. So that looks pretty good too. Similarly, we want to do the same thing here, but we're going to let those kind of wrap. So we can start by making the same change where we'll wrap everything in a div, throw that under here, and we'll add a class of SM flex. It's kind of annoying that this resets and closes. Okay, so now we've got this kind of madness going on. Looks like we got to be careful that our checkboxes don't shrink either. That's something that's been improved in the plugin, just hasn't been tagged in a release. Definitely need to work on that plugin a little bit to make this custom form experience a little bit smoother. Okay, so all that aside, we're going to want to do like a SM with 1/4 on these. We'll do the SM PX2 thing as well. And then on here, we'll do the SM negative MX2, kind of like our grid. And now we also want this to wrap, right? Because right now we're trying to say each one should be 25% width, but it's not working because there's more than 4 items. So if we do SM flex wrap, that should get us closer. Now, it is kind of dark that the air conditioning wraps. And it looks like Steve just cheated on that by not actually making them like 25% width each. But I think it's probably best that they're 25% each. I am going to cheat on this as well in a different way. And honestly, this is cheating in a sense, but in some ways it's not, because this is the sort of thing that you have to do when you're building products and designing UIs all the time. If we take the air conditioning one, as long as this is like a fixed set of options, right? It's not like dynamic. Let's take air conditioning and move it to the end where there would be a little bit more room for it. And instead of making this one with 1/4, we'll make this one with 1/2. And now we have room for it. So cheating a little bit, but I think it's a fine solution. Now Steve has like a lot more padding at the bottom. Again, I'm not totally sure if that's super deliberate. So let's see, what does he have? Like, he's got more padding up here too, but I think a lot of it's just because he like moved some stuff up after he copied this over and didn't really think about the padding too much, because you can see it's like not even here either. So I think I feel pretty okay with honestly just like leaving it a little tighter like this. Yeah, you could set flex to not shrink, but then they wouldn't be equally sized columns. It would force one of them to be larger. But that's okay. I kind of want everything to be like really equally sized. All right, so that's kind of I think all we need to do for that. It looks like this search bar gets a little bit wider. Maybe what we can do is give the search a max width, because if you look at it right now, it actually has no width stuff on it. So one thing that you'll notice, let's check this responsive stuff actually. See how this looks good? Everything seems to be working. At 320, which is kind of like the smallest font size in existence, the search doesn't fit. So this was something that was brought up at the end of the stream last time that I think we can quickly fix, and as part of what we're going to do next here. So this input, if we just give it like a width full and a display of block, because by default inputs I think are inline block with like a width of auto, that'll make sure that it shrinks. And then this button, we can make sure that we have like some space to the left of it, and then we'll be kind of okay. Now, yeah, the placeholder is a little bit cut off. I'm not too worried about it because it's on such a small screen size that no one's probably ever going to see it. But now if we jump back up to 640, I'm surprised that the input didn't get wider actually. Why didn't the input get wider? Is it because we need width full on this too? Yeah. Okay, no problem. Okay, so what I was gonna say is this input is just like as wide as it needs to be to kind of fit. Steve has it a little bit wider to sort of encourage people to type a longer search string. I think we could give that a size too. So in Tailwind, we sort of like one of your secret weapons for layout, I think, is the max width helpers. So we have we kind of have this like nice scale for maximum widths that kind of let you like specify like UI block sizes. And we were really thoughtful about designing the scale to make the sizes as useful as possible. So I use the max width stuff in Tailwind constantly when I'm trying to just like size chunks in a layout. So what I would do here is I would probably start by just saying, okay, this should have like a maximum width of say like MD. Now it's not going to affect anything on its own, but if you combine this with width full, it'll try to make it 100% and then constrain it down to this size. So that's quite a bit bigger than what Steve had, but I bet if we jump down to small or extra small, that'll be pretty close to what Steve had. Yeah, like that's pretty similar. So it's off the grid. We could have done it like a width 1/2. That could have been like another way to do it, but I kind of like this max width approach. I think it feels good. All right, so that's kind of that section. I guess we can do this button. So let's move the button over to the right. Steve has it on the left. I don't know. I'd be interested in a poll in the chat, left versus right for buttons. I'm used to things being on the right because that's what Mac OS does for everything, so I kind of like that. So I think I'm going to lean towards putting it on the right, but yeah. So why don't we just say for small screens, we're going to want this to be width auto and inline block instead of block. And that should get it to the left, yeah. And so that's kind of like what Steve had. If we want it on the right, then all we really need to do is do SM text right here. Did I forget to do an SM somewhere? Oh, for the max width stuff. I'm actually fine with the max width stuff applying everywhere because it won't actually matter. Because it's a max width, that's going to shrink anyways, right? So that doesn't actually make a difference. But I appreciate the reminder. Okay, so why don't we look at this menu now? Looks like these items are going to be always visible, and then there's this idea that there's going to be like a drop-down menu. I don't know if I want to tackle the drop-down menu just yet, but we can at least get things like in the right place. So this button where we are showing the this is the wrong thing. Okay, so this button that kind of shows the hamburger menu, I think we're going to want to hide this on bigger screens. So we'll do SM hidden, and now the button should go away. So that's fine. And for this V show is open, we're actually going to have to implement this a little bit differently too, because we actually like don't want to have any way of conditionally hiding it now. Yeah, I know Steve had more vertical padding. We can tweak that, but that's okay. We can think about that later. Again, I don't know if it was intentional because like he was really rushing this. We did all this in like 15 minutes. He probably would want a little bit more than we have here, but I'm not going to focus too much on getting it pixel perfect with the things that I know he didn't really do super deliberately. Okay, so this V show, we're not going to really be able to rely on views V show for this anymore because on larger screens, we want it to be always visible. So instead of doing V show is open, I think what we're going to want to do is have a dynamic class binding, and we're going to want to have basically hidden is going to be if not is open. Otherwise, we're going to have block if it is open. And that should work the same at smaller screens. So here we can open, close, open, close, open, close. But now if we add a class that's not dynamic, and we could just say SM block, now we can have it closed, but on small screens it should still just appear, which is kind of what we want. And now we just kind of want to move some stuff around. All right. So let's think about how we can get all this content up to the left. So we've got this div that holds the logo and the button. Now, basically what we want to do is turn this header into a flex container. So let's do SM flex to pull everything next to each other. And this should kind of just make a mess of things, honestly. Yeah. And then let's make these navigation items go next to each other too. So we could do that by making these links no longer be block elements. It's easier to just make this a flex container, I believe. Yeah, it was a little slow. Now we want to get rid of this MT1. So I'm going to do MT0 here. And that'll kind of get things in a reasonable place. Curiosity, I kind of want to see, these should be just like stretched, right? Like we're going to want to, let's just hide this whole div temporarily. So let's do SM hidden just so we can focus on working with this stuff. We've got a bottom border here, so let's do SM border B0 to get rid of it. And now we can just focus on like trying to get this stuff centered with each other. So I feel like if we do SM item center here, that might not do it on its own. And we're right about that. But let's start maybe by getting rid of some, see how we got this PB5 here? I think we actually kind of just want to get rid of the vertical padding here. So SM PY0. And just let the vertical padding around the logo kind of control things, because that's kind of what matters to us anyways. So now if we bring back the item center, let's see, does that center things? It does, but doesn't look good. But maybe it'll be okay when we move things over a bit. Also, Steve's using a smaller font here. I just realized that. I think he's only using it for larger screens though. So it's font size 14, whereas here I'm pretty sure he's using 16. Yeah. Okay, so once it's in the header, the font size shrinks. So let's do that too. So we'll do that at the end. I still don't really have like strong opinions about where to put some of these classes. I'm doing the responsive stuff here because I like having that margin top at the beginning, and I want it to be clear that we're sort of undoing that later. But looking at it, I think I would actually be fine with putting this stuff sort of at the end. And just thinking about it as like, here's like one screen size. Now here's overrides for the next screen size. And this way we could just do SM text SM for smaller text. Yeah, it's going to be kind of annoying how like misaligned this is with the logo. Might be worth thinking through what the best way to shove it down a little bit is. But maybe like when everything's right aligned and everything, it's just not as obvious, or it just doesn't matter as much. Okay, so let's shove all these links over to the right, and we might want to do a different hover treatment for these, because this just maybe doesn't make as much sense when it's not like in like a stacked list. We can maybe look at some other sites for some inspiration there, but let's start by just doing SM justify between to kind of jam that off to the right. Yeah, it doesn't, the difference in alignment doesn't really bother me as much anymore. And let's think. Let's go to like Stripe. What does Stripe do for like hover states for this stuff? Well, I guess they open menus. So they do like, they kind of dim the text. That's kind of interesting. What about other sites? What does like Netlify do? I got like kind of a few sites that I always check for this sort of stuff. So they just like have it a little, not as quite as white. Is this white? Yeah, this is white. So what about Prisma? That's another site that I think has like pretty nice design. They kind of do that background highlighting thing. So maybe it's not as bad as I thought. Maybe we can just make like the padding a little bit less aggressive, make it a little bit tamer. So we have PX3. So maybe on small screens we can go with like PX2 or something. Yeah, I mean like that's kind of fine. We can put a little bit of space between them as well. So why don't we do SM ML2, but only for the second two. See where that gets us. What does Steve have for spacing? I mean, pretty similar to this, really. Okay, no big deal. Yeah, we could like try and use top padding or kind of just like in general muck around with very specific values to try and get this shoved down a little bit, but I generally try to avoid solutions like that. And if I can, like ideally I'd like to be able to tell the browser just like align the baseline of this with the baseline of this. And sometimes you can get away with like items baseline. Maybe that'll get us a little bit closer, but I don't think it's really going to matter in this case because this isn't actually text, right? So it's not actually going to align them. So I think we can just roll with a centered look for now. And if I was going to solve this in any way, I would probably consider exporting this SVG with like more space at the bottom to shove it up more. And because if you look at like Steve's, it's hard to tell for sure how much space he has. He's got 16 pixels at the bottom and 14 pixels at the top, so he's already got a little bit extra padding here. And then this is all screwed up. Can't even measure it because of how it's kind of put together, but it's okay as a start. Okay, so let's get this avatar in place. So that's going to be interesting too, because it's like part of a different container. So I don't think it's actually going to be that bad. Let's get rid of the SM hidden on this and instead put it on this, because we actually don't want to show the links for that. So we can also hide this name according to the design. There we go. So that's gone. So what we want to do now is, instead of making this block, we're going to want to make this flex so we can put stuff next to each other. And we're probably wanting to do item center within this thing. And then, yeah, we've kind of got that avatar in place. Pretty decent. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting is on small screens, this is just like an avatar, right? It's just like a picture. But on large screens, this is actually going to be like a drop-down trigger, like it's going to be a button. I don't want to get into that just yet, but it's kind of interesting thing to think about because we would actually want different markup. Like we probably wouldn't want it to be a button semantically. So there's two ways that we could solve that. One is to use JavaScript to like dynamically render a different element, like a different tag name. That's probably not going to be a great solution in this case. It's just like breaking away from our current workflow too much and trying to do like viewport width measuring in JavaScript is just kind of hairy. But in this case, what I would probably do, we might just want to have two instances of the image. Like we might have this be shown on mobile screens, and then we might have an image that's just shown on larger screens. And if I was going to do that, I would probably put it in this container. But again, for now, we can just kind of roll with what we have. What do we have for spacing and stuff? I mean, like this, we got too much padding at the top and bottom now, which I'm guessing is coming from this element. So let's just do like SMPY0 here. And it looks like we're using too big of an image maybe. Looks like Steve does have different sizes For these, he's got 32 by 32, 40 by 40. So we'll make this image a little bit smaller when it's in the header. So instead of H10, W10, we'll do SM like H8, SM, W8. See what that gets us. Yeah, that looks a little bit closer to what he had. And then we probably don't need quite as much space either. So one thing I'm curious about is there's like a PX5 on this. Is that actually accomplishing something? So I kind of feel like the padding should actually be on the parent container. But this has got PX4. Yeah, okay, so maybe it is fine. What do we have for padding on this container? That's PX4 too. So why? Yeah, so I guess like this is inset a little bit from that, but it probably shouldn't be. So let's just do SMPX4. I kind of just want it to be PR4, honestly. And I actually kind of want it to be like on this element. Because it's really padding for like this whole container that we're concerned about, you know? Like I don't think it makes sense structurally for that padding to be on the where the image is. I think it just makes sense for this container to have some minimum padding. And then this thing, we're going to want to do SMPX0. But we will probably want to do some left margin on it. What's going on here? And I wish this friggin' scroll bar would never show up. I don't know why it ever shows up. So it looks like we just got like some double padding here that's sort of making this happen. So I don't think we really need padding on this container at this size. So we can just get rid of that there. And then we can just use left margin to sort of control the position of the avatar relative to the other stuff. Maybe we'll start with ML4. It's probably pretty close, honestly, and just kind of roll with that. Do you always prefer space between when there's only 2 items instead of having ML auto? Yes, I do always do that. I don't have a reason why it's better than using ML auto, though. Both options work great. It kind of just feels right to me because I'm sort of just specifying like how should the contents of this container be laid out. There should be something on the left, something on the right. Kind of just fits my brain better, I think, but I don't think it really matters which option you go with. Okay, so this is kind of looking good. Let's make sure we didn't break anything on smaller screens. So like this still works. Everything inside there still looks correct. You know, this still looks okay. Yeah, so that's kind of the first step. We kind of have a bit of a menu kind of in place here. So next thing I want to look at, holy smokes, is this stuff, because we kind of screwed this up. So something that you might realize here is the only reason this was working at size 375 was actually kind of just by chance. And if you'll notice, the image is actually getting like warped here. And we just didn't really notice it because we were just working at one size. So we don't want the image to get warped. We want the image to kind of render kind of nicely. So what we need to do is come up with a way to just preserve the aspect ratio of the image. And we can't really do this with Tailwind like raw. We can't do it with built-in Tailwind stuff. There's no like aspect ratio helpers. So I think what I'd like to do is try and solve it. There's 2 ways we can solve it, and maybe just for fun we'll walk through both and then make a decision about which way we want to do it. So in general, the trick to creating something with a fixed aspect ratio in CSS involves using absolute positioning and relative positioning and relying on vertical padding, and the fact that percentage-based vertical padding actually is based on the width of the element, not the height, to force it to a fixed aspect ratio. So in the design, Steve has these images as like 340 by 280. So let's see. Come on. I just want to select this piece. Can I please just select the piece I want to select? 340 by 280. So that's 82% padding is what we're going to want. So what I'd like to do in my head is figure out, okay, kind of like what is this aspect ratio approximately? Because it's just arbitrary, right? Like Steve just kind of like decided on an aspect ratio. So 280 divided by 340, yeah, you can reduce that down to like 28 divided by 34 is the same thing, which is really like, what is that, 14 over 17? Which is kind of like a weird number. But maybe that's like not far off from like, 5/6 is pretty similar, right? So maybe we can make it like a 5/6 aspect ratio or something like that. 4/5. Yeah, 4/5 is pretty similar too. I think 5/6 is closer. Doesn't really matter what one we go with. So this is what I'm going to do first. First solution is to, instead of trying to create some fancy abstraction related to aspect ratios, we're just going to customize Tailwinds Tailwind's padding helpers. So I'll show you how to do that. So if we go to our tailwind.config.js file, we can extend padding in Tailwind to include some new values. So say we wanted to add this 5/6 value, we could just say, okay, we want to be able to say padding 5/6, and that's going to be this stupid number. So it's going to be 83.3333333%. And now we should be able to use that value for things. So this is not going to be correct in terms of what we're doing here right now, but I just want to be able to show you that we could do like PB5/6. Is it not showing up? Oh yeah, it is showing up. It just doesn't show up in Chrome DevTools for some reason. But there's padding bottom. That's kind of working, right? So if we wanted to do this in just like a pure sort of utility-based way, we'll jump back up to 640 here. Refresh. What we're going to want to do is jump back to app, find this component, and where we have this image, this container for this image, we're going to want to give this a fixed aspect ratio and use absolute positioning to get the image to fill the area. So if we give this a position of relative and we give it a padding bottom of 5/6, and we just comment this out for a second and we just give this like a BG black. So now we have an element that's got a fixed aspect ratio. So it's always going to show with that aspect ratio. And you can see as we resize, the element's height adapts so that it always stays kind of the same. So let's work on this just at the 375 size for a second. So now if we want this image to fill this space, what we can do is we can give the image a position of absolute, and then we can say we want basically the top offset to be 0, the right to be 0, the bottom to be 0, the left to be 0. We can do that in all those at once in Tailwind by just using inset 0. And now you can see it's not quite tall enough because the image is trying to preserve its, I don't know, maybe it's because of the height. Okay, so if we say H full, now it's going to go full height, and we can use object fit to make sure that it doesn't stretch. So right now it is stretched, right? Like you can see if we take this image and we say like height is 50% or whatever. See how it's like stretching at this point? So if we use object cover, that'll make sure that it just kind of centers itself and works correctly. One thing I would like to understand more about in CSS that I don't totally know when it happens and when it doesn't happen is how why it's necessary for me to use hfull here. Because if you look at this, top 0, right 0, bottom 0, left 0, you would think that even without hfull, it would be trying to fit it to the area that it's covering, right? But it doesn't seem to matter. Like if I change this bottom value, it's not until it gets past the point where it's necessary. I mean, it doesn't even seem to do anything. So for certain elements, it seems like this is all you need to do to get something to fill the space. Whereas for other elements, sometimes it feels like it's not enough and you have to actually do the explicit height 100% at the same time. Now, something else that's interesting, notice how like this black background disappears as soon as I do height 100%. It's kind of suspect to me, but whatever. So anyways, here we go. That's kind of correct now. And if we resize the browser window, you can see like the card just gets like huge, which is okay. Probably not what we want, but it's fine. So what we do want to do though is figure out, okay, well, I like a larger size, and it's actually even like a little bit kind of odd to me that even at this, like 639 is like the biggest sort of like mobile size. That's like a pretty big friggin' card for a layout that big. But let's not worry about it too much. The reality is there's no devices that even really exist in this upper limit. Like most phones are like maybe at most 500 pixels wide. So even though like developers are always resizing their browsers and doing fancy things, trying to optimize a layout so it's like uses the space in the most efficient way possible at like 600 pixels, it turns out to not really be that important, because in practical real world scenarios, it's just no one has a viewport of that width. So now that we kind of have this set up like this, I think what we should do is like kind of duplicate this element. I'm going to cheat and do that by just doing like v4 equals isn't there a way to just do I in 4 or something like that in view? Yeah. So now we just have 4 copies of it that we can just lay out however we want. Okay, so I was going to talk about the other way that we could do the aspect ratio thing. So basically the other way that we could do it is we could create like we could create a helper that lets us do something like aspect, say like 5x6 or something, you know, or 6x5, however you want to think about it. 6 divided by 5, 1.2. What would it be? Like we usually say 16:9 for something that's wider. So this would probably be, I guess, 6x5 would be the aspect ratio, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, so you could do something like this. And what we could do is we could define a class that bakes in the relative thing, the padding bottom, and targets its like direct child and makes it absolute, and kind of does this stuff. And if we were going to do that, I would just do it. There's 2 ways we could do it. We could do it in our Tailwinds config file. I would probably do it before Tailwinds utilities. So we could override it if necessary. So we could do something like aspect 6x5 or whatever. And this would be position absolute. And I mean, 2 ways we could do it. We could use Tailwinds like apply stuff, right? So we could just say add apply this, and then we could say done aspect 6x5 any direct child. Then we can sort of copy the things that are relevant, which is really just like these things. We can say apply that. And now we could just change this to be aspect 6x5. And if I did this correctly, we should, in theory, have the similar sort of thing, but something about it doesn't really seem to be working, does it? Let's see. So we've got aspect 6x5, position, relative. This has oh, aspects. Should check the chat. Yeah, so that would be like another way to do it. We could do it with like a custom ratio class like this. But to be perfectly honest, I don't really find that to be any better than what we had yet. Like maybe if we were doing a lot of stuff like that, I could see it being helpful. But in this case, I actually just don't mind it being this way. Okay, so let's pull this down a little bit. So if we look at what Steve's got over here, he's kind of given these things like a width of 387, which is totally arbitrary. But he's basically saying like, okay, I don't want these things to get wider than a certain amount. So we could say on small screens, we want like the max width to be like, say, the SM one. Right? So like even extra small could maybe be all right, you know? And then you could sort of like scroll through these horizontally. So let's see if we can get this to work. So we're also going to want to say on small screens that this should probably be display flex. And SM width full, SM flex shrink 0. Okay, there we go. So this will make sure that we have like this overflow stuff happening. So now I think we could do something like SM negative MX2, and then on here we could do SM PX2 and get a little bit of space between them. Now this is going to scroll the whole site, which we don't want. So we could make this SM overflow X auto. And now we kind of got horizontal scrolling there. Now it's not perfect because you can see we're chopping off the shadow at the bottom, so we should probably give ourselves a little bit of padding. We're also, the cards are getting cut off by the padding on the site. So we can rethink maybe how we build this to make sure that we can let it like go full bleed, because I think that would kind of look cooler. All right, so let's start maybe by just adding some padding to the bottom of this container. So maybe we'll do like a PB4 or something. That might not be enough. It's still cutting off like the shadow, so maybe we'll do like PB8. And that kind of seems like not too crazy to me. Like I think that looks pretty good. So now how this is getting cut off here, we're going to have to like figure out why that's happening. So I think it's because we got this PX4 here. So if we get rid of the PX4 there and we instead maybe wrap this header stuff in a container and move the PX4 there, now we won't have PX4 on the cards, but now they go all the way to the edge, which we actually don't want, right? So I think what we want is for a second I was going to naively suggest that we just add padding to the to this element. I'm not quite sure that's going to work, but let's try it just to see. PX4. Oh yeah, that does work. Perfect. Oh, we got a little bit of overflow happening on the side there. Let's double check that that's just not a DevTools thing. All right, so let's find out what's causing the overflow. So if we just do star, outline, 1 pixel, solid red. So it looks like it's the padding on this container. Probably the fact that it's like padding combined with the negative margin. So I kind of think that the solution is going to be to add another container. So let's just check. We'll have to think about which classes belong on which container. So let's start by just like moving all of these here, and then we'll sort of selectively move classes back up to the parent until we get like the effect that we want. I think probably it's going to be like, yeah, we'll see. Okay, so that's poking out. Let's try moving this here and this here. Yeah, that's, now it doesn't quite look right on this side. That doesn't look like enough. It's because we're just getting the padding from the element. I would think that we'd be trying to get the padding from okay, so that gives us full padding on the left, but not full padding on that side. One dirty solution I can think of him that, I mean, we could just do like SMPR2 here. Does that solve the problem? No? Okay, so that's because the scrolling is on the... What would be a good way to solve this? We want to have equal padding. Like really what I want is I want like the container that the things in the scrollable container to have the padding. Is maybe that all I need to do? Is maybe this just needs to go here? Please don't tell me I need another div. Because in my head, like the other solution I can think of is like, I still don't really understand why we can't see the padding on this. Like, why is this constrained to 656 width anyways? Shouldn't that just be like full width? What happens if I go like overflow X visible? Like that should be the defaults. Yeah, I'm not really totally sure why this is constrained to... That's got a PX4. So this thing that has PX4, okay, because it's got the negative MX2. Let's see. What are people saying? Added more negative margin. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's high pressure situation when you're here on the stream, for sure. I mean, really all I want is I want to have a container that has some padding in it that is wider than the parent so that's scrollable. Like if I just get rid of this, does that solve some of my problem? See, it doesn't quite solve it because now we've got like too much stuff here, right? So in some ways, do I just need to add yet another goddamn div? And then just for interest's sake, let's see if I can solve this by adding another div. See if it can be done. Okay, so SM negative MX2. Does this solve the problem? It still doesn't solve the problem. How? How could it possibly not solve the problem? This is UI development for you. The thing that I find most peculiar is that this element is only 640 wide. Like that doesn't seem correct to me. It feels like this element should be expanding to fit all of the children, which it's not. Like why is this limited to 640? Like if I say max width none, does that change anything? No. So this element has no overflow behavior sit on it. If I get rid of this, now this element is still 640. This element's still 640. Overflow X scroll, like still 640. Why isn't it expanding? Like it's got too much stuff in it, so the element should be bigger. Don't really know why that's happening. So this is something maybe I'll like research later, and we can just kind of live with what we have here. I do want this element to have the right amount of left padding, so I think we are going to want to bring this back. I mean, maybe if I just do negative ML2 instead of, maybe that's enough. Still not enough. Nothing I can do will give me the space that I want on this side. Very surprising. I mean, is it that big of a deal at the end of the day? No, but I get frustrated when I can't figure out how to make some tiny detail correct. All that to say, I think this is probably a decent place to finish for now because I got a thing in 15 minutes. But yeah, okay. And looks like we screwed something up here. We should probably add like some. We probably want this px4 to always be there. Yeah, okay. I feel like this didn't used to wrap. Oh, because we're on like a tiny screen size. All right, so I mean, we're probably going to want some like top margin on each one of these. So we could do like MT4 or something like that. Like what happens there? Maybe MT8. So you have a little bit of space between the listings. MT12 even. With the shadow, it kind of feels like you need a little bit more space. Doesn't seem too bad. I think maybe MT10. MT12 is a little much. And now we have like space up here that we don't want because the first item is going to have it too. So we could combat that in two ways that I can think of. Like one is to do a negative margin on the container. So we do negative MT10 and that'll pull everything up to kind of where we were before. But now we have collapsing margin problem. So another way that we could do that some people find offensive, but I think is fine, is we could say MT10 only if I is greater than 0. Is this going to start at 1? Yeah, okay. It's surprising that it does that. It just goes 1, 2, 3, 4. So for the first item, we won't have it, and then for the other ones, we will. Okay, anyways, I think that's probably a decent place to wrap up. We can kind of just check this out without the DevTools open for a second. And oh yeah, we got a little bit of a responsive problem here. Let's quickly fix that. We'll do like we'll just have always an SMMT0 to fix that. Okay, so this is scrollable. Seems not too bad, except for the stupid friggin' gap, which hopefully one day we can solve. Otherwise, like we kind of get like a stacked layout when things get smaller. You know, this is still collapsible and everything's kind of lined up nicely. We could add some more spacing, like I think Josh mentioned. Maybe we can perfect that another time. And we've got this top menu that, you know, is still nice on mobile, but then when you get to this size, it's kind of fully there. So maybe next stream we can do kind of the next breakpoint, which I don't think things get too much crazier after this. Honestly, the next one is basically the same. And then we do like a 3-column layout for the filters, just kind of as a fun experiment. And then things that get a little bit more interesting when we have to do this sidebar thing. So I'll do another stream tomorrow. I'm not sure what time yet, but I'll announce it on Twitter. Yeah, I'm going to record a podcast now, and then I'm probably going to spend the rest of the day trying to figure out how to get this padding the way I want it to be. So thanks for checking out the stream, and see you tomorrow.